I was selected to attend the Naval Academy's International Security Seminar. One of the speakers was the Deputy Secretary of State and had been in Vietnam, and he gave a talk on the Strategic Hamlet program in Vietnam. It was 1963. And that was the first time I had full. I mean, I knew there was war going on, but we were not yet really heavily involved. And that was my first real introduction to the fact that there was a war that I might have to get involved in. It's 1965, and we're sending our first divisions into Vietnam. And I picked up the phone and called my assignments section and said, what does it look like? And they basically said, you're going to be going. And if you volunteer to go, you can pick the kind of assignment that you want. You can't, it's not possible to say the exact place, but you could pick the type of assignment. So I volunteered for a tactical intelligence assignment. And they kept their word, as I say in the book. They kept their word. They sent me to the 9th Military Intelligence Detachment, 9th Infantry Division. And so I arrived there in December of 67.
At that time, let's say the day before you begin that process of moving from the States to South Vietnam, um, the day before, say a fellow officer just asks you, you're talking, and a fellow officer asks you, what is this about? Why are we going to Vietnam? What's the point of us being there? What would you have said at the time?
Well, a conversation didn't happen, amazingly enough.
Mm.
The flight over was, all I remember is where we stopped for refueling. We stopped in Honolulu in the middle of the night. And then we went to Guam, and you couldn't get out of the airplane. We got out in Honolulu, but not in Guam. And then we went to Clark for refueling.
In the
And those that didn't come up. The only thing was if I saw a guy with an MI brass on it, we were wearing khaki uniforms. If I saw a guy with an MI brass on it, I could say, "Where are you going?" Or you go. That's what he says. I don't know, but this, that, and the other. So the subject of anything to do with war and are we going to live or die or going to be wounded, it never happened, which was kind of a surprise. And you asked when did I first realize I was in a combat zone? It was when we landed at Bien Air Force Base, and we got out, we got our duffel bags, and we got on a bus with this really heavy chicken wire. And everybody that's written about it that comes up, I even mentioned it, but that was to keep the kids from throwing a grenade. And I said,
in the bus.
this is for real. This is for real.
Right.
And getting from the air base out to Long Bin base where the reception center wasn't a very long drive, 20, 30 minutes at the most. And seeing the refugee camps along the road, these houses made out of sheets of Coca-Cola cans and stuff. This is serious. So it was day one in Vietnam that I realized I really was in a war zone.
As an intelligence officer, what kinds of work did you do? And we'll note this was your first tour. You're going to return to Vietnam very near the end of the war, right in the latter stages of the war. But this is your first tour. You arrive in 67. Um, what kind of work did you do? What did your work involve?
Well, the Army kept its word. Did in fact go to the 9th MI detachment. When I arrived there, I sent my first several weeks. The detachment commander needed an admin officer. And so I actually did that for about a month. But he said, as soon as the first division chief, I'll give it to you. And he did. And I became the chief of the Interrogation of Collision and War Section, IPW. And it was at that time we had of course, our main headquarters was at Bearcat, which was very close to Long Bin. And we had detachments in the city of near the city of Tan An, and in Dong Can, which was to be the new base camp down at the Mekong, on the bank of the northernmost branch of the Mekong River. So I had interrogators in those three places, and my job was to manage the flow of interrogation reports, if you will, and supervise. In those days, the tactical intelligence support for an infantry division was our detachment of about 35 people. And there was an ASA detachment. Probably, I don't know how big it was. I didn't have an SI clearance in those days. And that was it. Now it's a battalion of, dozens, if not hundreds of people. So people did, in fact, listen to us. And our aim was tactical intelligence. So what would the POW tell us? What was your unit? What was your strength? What was your morale? Where was your hiding place when you got in a battle? Where did you go? That sort of thing. We also had an attached ARVN MI detachment that was attached to us. So I worked with young Vietnamese officers doing the same thing. And we cross-checked each other. Everyone interrogated the same person, and then we checked in, what did he tell you? What did he tell us? And it was good work. I enjoyed it. So now this is December, and then it's December. I sent my Christian interpreters home for a week of holiday. And then in Tet comes, and I tell my Buddhist interpreters to go home for a week in holiday.
Yeah.
And then the Tet offensive happened. And how did we know about it? When the Long Bin ammo dump exploded and woke us all up. And things were in a chaotic situation. And my detachment commander basically said, we don't have enough intelligence. I'm going to send you, take one of your interpreters. And there was a guy from the division G2 section, and we had a helicopter assigned to us, and we flew all over the Mekong Delta, stopping at each place where we had troops fighting and trying to find out what the order of battle was. Who are we fighting? How many of them are there? That took us a couple of days. Meanwhile, my interpreters and my interrogators are working really, really hard. And at the time, I think I had 4 lieutenants. I was a captain and 4 lieutenants, and probably a total of 10 interrogators. It was very, very difficult first month, if you will, as a section chief in the middle of the Tet offensive. And when things started to quiet down, the detachment commander called me into his office. We were in the tent, so it wasn't a big deal. But he said that the brigadier general that's in charge of the two brigades at Dongcam and Tan An is very unhappy with his intelligence, and I want you to go down there. And he gave me the title, Commander Forward, and forward in parentheses. So I took over the intelligence people that were in those 2 locations. And only the ones we had were interrogators and counterintelligence security guys. And I went to Dongcam, and I went to General Molton, who was Brigadier General Molton, who was the commander of those 2 brigades. What, sir? I know you're not happy. What do you need me to do? And he told me basically, your audience is the troops and the commanders that are fighting the war. It's not the guys back in Bearcat or in Saigon. I just want you to get the intelligence out immediately and worry about writing reports later. Our interrogation booths were 3-hole shitters, latrines that were mounted on skids, and Dongtan was all dredged sand out of the Mekong. And when you needed one, the engineers would tow one. Somebody was building them, they tow it. I said, I need 4 of them to be my interrogation officers. When I got there, our barracks was right next to the POW cage, if you will. But the cage was a series of tents and barbed wire. There was no standing structure there. And that was where the MP guards and where the POWs were held until we were only allowed to keep them for, I think we had 3 days, and then we had to move them up the chain. And so I was sitting there at midnight one night in my shitter, trying to bring reports up to date, and in walks General Molton. I'm wearing a T-shirt and flip-flops. And he comes in, and I leap to my feet, and he says, sit down, tell me what's going on. That's the way he was. He was very definitely in command, with all of that implies, but he was very concerned about his people. And he went to the hospital every night and briefed the doctors and nurses about what was going on. He said they need to know, that they deserve to know, because they're the ones that are taking care of my soldiers. I lived in a CIA house. I called it Embassy House. I worked in the division tactical operations centers, Fung Wong / Phoenix coordinating center. And every couple of days I would take potential targets out to the division. That was my last 3 months.
There are questions I want to ask about various topics you've raised. Um, First question has to do with the interrogations. What kinds of incentives were provided to Vietcong NVA to, to spill the beans, so to say, to relate what they knew? I mean, did you have a bundle of incentives you could offer available to you, or how
We
did
had
that
nothing to
work?
offer them except they were alive and they were getting fed and they could take a bath and that was it. And a lot of our detainees were field soldiers that were caught or wounded in a contact. Uh, we had a lot more detainees. The official word is detainees, and then we had to decide. It was my job to decide how many of them are innocent civilians. And in the ninth division, that would be about 90% of the day's take were innocent civilians that were wrapped up in a village sweep or something. Civil defendants were basically males of draft age who were not in the army. Maybe they were VC. We didn't know. And then POWs was probably 5% of what we got. So I spent 100% of my time on 5% of our targets, if you will. We were asked to get, what unit are you in? How many of your friends were killed or wounded in that last battle? And where were you told to go to get away? And that sort of thing. What were you armed with? Some of them were very willing to talk. Many of them had been impressed into the VC. They didn't want to be VC, but they were impressed in it. And now they're out. Thank God, that sort of thing. Some of them were very, very dedicated, and we knew they were a POW because they were captured in a battle. And they were saying, "No, I was out doing my farming, and and it's not my fault." They were dedicated. We were absolutely following the Geneva Convention rules. We were not slapping them around. We were not torturing them. We were not threatening to throw them out of helicopters. We didn't. We were following the rules, and we got an amazingly small amount of information. But what we did get was very valued because it was very timely and it was real stuff. This is where these guys are going to be next time. Maybe we'll try and do an operation over there. One that really, I told you about. They captured an NVA major, and he was very happy to tell us everything he could about his trip down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and how he got to be in South Vietnam, and how he got to be in where we were. But he wouldn't say anything. He said, "Not. I just got here. I don't know anything about what unit or anything I was in. I was being taken by a common liaison." Maybe that was true, maybe it was not. General Molton says, "Bring him to my mess for lunch. We'll treat him as a major." So we did that, and much to the dismay of most of his staff, but we did have a few MPs go with us just in case. And me and my interpreter, and we were sitting at the general's side, and he was asking him, "What about this? What about that?" And again, I really can't help you with that. I just got here yesterday, sort of a thing. But I was very impressed with the fact that he would tell us everything he could about how he got into the war, but he wouldn't tell us about his immediate circumstances. I thought that was very courageous and very, very impressive. Of course, we sent the report in that we'd captured an NVA major, and the report bounced into Saigon and it bounced back to us, and they said, "He's lying to you. There are no NVA in the Mekong Delta." Well, I know there was at least one. The interpreters immediately said, "He's a northerner."
They can tell from the accent. Exactly.
And he was willing to tell us how he came from the north to the south. I suppose he could have made up every word of it, but we didn't think he was. We think he was telling us.
He couldn't make up the accent, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was the reaction from Saigon. There's no NVA in the Delta. The same people that were not counting the NVA coming down the trail. So
Right.
I was a little bit discouraged by that reception. I was discouraged by my senior leadership When I went off to spend 3 months as a liaison officer, I was working with advisors. I was working with CIA. Not much. They wouldn't let me into their own admin office because I didn't have a full clearance. But they were very, very professional. And you asked about SEALs. Yes, we had the SEAL advisor lived in Embassy House with me, and so did two or three others whose I just don't remember who they were. And I don't remember how many CIA guys there were there, but there were 4 or 5 of them, and they were all very professional. Some of them were working with civilian aspects of government, and some of them were tactical, some of them were like the SEAL. But I really enjoyed working with them, and I enjoyed working with the advisors. And that was what made the last month of my career with the 9th MI detachment worthwhile. 6 good months, 3 really bad months, and then 3 okay months.
Did these CIA guys who were there, were they at all involved in any combat situations? Would they get involved in those combat situations?
I don't know. I know the SEAL guy did because he was the advisor to the Provincial Reconnaissance Unit, the PRUs. It was not a SEAL team, it was a SEAL advising the PRU.
Right.
And everyone was very security conscious. Everyone was very, I was a compartmented, outsider that was living with them. So no, I was not privy to what they got unless it's specifically related to the 9th Division.
Okay. Um, during your first tour, what did you pick up about the motivation? So, you say the large majority of the folks that get scooped up are, you can't tell who's friend or foe, so soldiers go into a village and, round folks up. But let's say, okay, we've isolated now those that we are either certain or pretty certain that these are VC, NVA. What did you pick up about their motivations? Um, and I'm guessing it would be mixed depending on who you're talking to. But I wonder if you could just talk about that, the different kinds of motivations these guys had to be fighting as
Uh,
as
yeah, and you're right. There was a difference. The guys that didn't want to be VC were very talkative. Uh, the guys that clearly were VC, uh, uh, not so much. And the guys later on, of course, that were Northerner infiltrators, if you will, were even tougher. Um, they were motivated by a couple of things. They'd been told that we would torture them to death, and when we didn't, they relaxed. I'll say. Uh, we didn't ask them if they were communists or not. We didn't ask them about who their political officer was or what they were telling them. We wanted to know, where are you going to go if hadn't been caught? Where were you last night? Where were you 2 days ago? Uh, that was what we were after. And if we could tell which one, the tough ones, couldn't answer those questions, or they said nobody told us. And that part of that might have been true, that they went where they went when they were told to go there, but not beforehand. So my impression of them, and which continued, into my second tour, was that they were very dedicated. I respected them uh, for their courage and their, what's the right word, their willingness to put for much worse conditions than we did. And so no, I didn't take them for granted. Uh, I personally thought that they were good soldiers, and it was too bad that we weren't on the same side, because I would like to have men like that working for me.
You've expressed a degree of admiration for the tenacity of the adversary. Um, what was your perception? Now, again, interacting with individuals, things will be different among individuals, but your general perception of the ARVN forces that you're working with, what was your sense of them?
First tour, I didn't have much. The only ARVN I worked with in the MI detachment were my sergeants and the few people from that ARVN MI detachment. I taught conversational English to the MI detachment, ARVN MI detachment commander, for example. Uh, their officers, their intelligence officers, were equal to ours, I thought. And they had a bit more motivation, and we didn't sit in on their interrogation. So what happened in their little booth, we don't know. But in my 3 months in the Arvin headquarters TLC, if you will, my impression was professionalism, and I'm talking about people of my same level, captains, majors, lieutenants, but certainly not generals. And I could not make a determination about the ability or lack thereof of senior Arvin commanders. You've read more than I do, probably, about some were good, some were bad. I certainly, in my counterparts' work, I've met some really, really good ones. The ones I worked with later in my tour, second tour, were good. So I guess I'd say I respected the enemy. I mean, they had walked down or come, bounced in the truck down that Ho Chi Minh Trail and put up with pretty bad food and pretty bad conditions, and we're still fighting. So yeah, I respected them. A different opinion, of course, about the Vietcong infrastructure, which is really what I was aimed at in that TOC and on my second tour. They were cowardly, brutal people who fought by intimidation and torture and probably hate would be a good description of what I felt toward them.
And these are
So
the, and then the Vietcong infrastructure, my understanding is that these are the primary target of the Phoenix program, is that right?
that's right. It was targeted at the Viet Cong infrastructure, the local VC government. The CIA, of course, ran the Phoenix program for years and years and years. It was only turned over to the military, I think, in 1968. I think when we started assigning officers to the district and province with the establishment of the DIOCC and the PIOCC. Intelligence and Operations Coordinating Center. That just got started when I was working in Mito in late 68. When I went back second time, it was a big deal. And that's how I got back, because they wanted lieutenants and captains to go to DIOCs and PIOCs. And that's what I volunteered to do.
Yeah.
So from up until 68, it was a CIA program. So some of them were still interested in it. They still had contacts. They still had ideas and things. And like I say, I was not privy to their operations. They just did not give me that information. They would say, we need you to tell the division that there's going to be a couple of Americans over here or a PRU team down here. And that's what we did. That was part of my job.
You weren't aware of whether CIA actually would sometimes join the SEALs or join the PRU as they went out on Phoenix
No,
operation?
I wasn't. No. The only thing I knew is that one PRU unit that I worked with was advised by a real honest to goodness Navy officer. And if the CIA guys were doing stuff, I was not informed of that. And they didn't talk about it afterwards.
Tet breaks at the end of January, 68. What do you remember about this, the first sense you had that something big was underway? What was it that, that drove home to you that something pretty significant was happening?
I was not aware of it at all. In Bearcat, it was not something we were cognizant of. I did not attend the general's briefings in Bearcat. I did every day, twice a day, and when I was in Dong Camp. But in Bearcat, I did not. And so if there was mumblings and stuff, I just don't remember it. I just remember a great big, when the ammo dump went up, and then there's fighting all over the place. But Bearcat was one of the few U.S. base camps that was never attacked. So we didn't have mortar attacks in Bearcat.
So for you then, was the Tet offensive, did in your work, then the Tet offensive, did that mean just primarily that the intensity of the work and the pace of the work just picked up dramatically for the space of a couple weeks?
Well, once we knew what was going on, after the big boom, if you will, and we're starting to get the word about what was going on, yes, our work was extremely intense. And I'm doing it at least initially with only two Christian interpreters because my Vietnamese and Buddhists were at home. Uh, I had, for example, one young sergeant and one interpreter lying on the ground, and it long been interrogating captured VC, wounded as well as unwounded, right in the middle of the battle. We got him a Bronze Star for that. But basically, it was in Dongtam. They said they had whispers of something happening, but they didn't know what was going on until Dongtam was mortared every night. So that was not unusual, but it was a really big, and all of a sudden there's fighting in Mito, and there's all over the place. So I would say I would call myself an ordinary soldier, and I did not know in advance there was going to be an offensive.
And then as it unfolds, would you say that the increased tempo pace in response to Tet, what does that go on for 2 or 3 weeks about?
Yeah, that's about right. The month of February was really, really busy. The first several days were the keys to the battles. That's when either, in every case, the VC and VA attacking forces were defeated, except of course in Hue and some, a few other places. As far as the 9th Division was concerned, the big issue was initially Mito, and then second tent, which was like April or May. It was Saigon, and we sent a brigade to Saigon, the southern side of Saigon. So, but I was not involved in that at all. And so all we noticed was that we were working 24 hours a day, and we'd sleep when we could, and the demand for reports was instant.
One of the things we hear about Tet is that the Viet Cong were just, dealt a heavy blow during Tet, and after Tet, you hear vets and read what folks write that the Viet Cong were not a significant force after Tet, that the NVA kind of took over. Just wondering, you come back for your second tour. You are down in the Delta again. Does that resonate with your experience? Did it feel to you like the Viet Cong had been decimated during Tet?
Yes and no, because Kenwa, like I said, was a VC province, very strong support for the VC. And when I was a deputy district senior advisor, my first 10 months in Hanwang, we were still fighting local VC. Very well, good soldiers. They were very dedicated, but they were VC. They were locals. It wasn't until the NVA regiment invaded Hanwang in 1972 that we were up to our ass in alligators, and they were all North Vietnamese. By then, as we discovered later, a lot of our VC were now really Northerners. They were still in VC named units, but they were Northerners. But we didn't have a real good feel on how that built up until that regiment invaded. And that had to do with the scale of combat, if you will. The first 10 months I was there, I was in several firefights, but not dozens. Several, but not dozens of firefights. And we knew when we usually had a pretty good idea of how many enemy we killed. Didn't capture any. If there were interrogations going on in my district headquarters, I was not aware of them. I think they just never caught them. But the fact that we had northern units, when I went to my second district, as you may have read, we closed the team in May of 72, my first team, and I moved to Mokai district, which was the toughest district in the province, and that was where the VC and the NLF were actually formed, in Mokai district. We had a pretty good idea we were fighting Northerners then. But the scale of district operations were larger there. I had to get used to the fact that instead of me going out with a platoon of RF or PF, it would be with my boss and me, and going with the battalion strength operation. So the forces were bigger, and they were obviously stronger. And then, of course, as the intelligence came in, we knew we were mostly fighting NVA fillers. They were still calling them NVA units. what they had obviously infiltrated through Cambodia and from the sea coming in from the ocean. Uh, so yeah, it was not really sure. We didn't get very many intelligence reports as advisors. That we got them, every day in our inbox. The interpreter translated them, and they said, VC propaganda team was in Hamlet such and such last night. And then we go out on operation, and if my first contact was clearly VC, and rather than Northerners, and they ambushed us, and then they tried to run, and we caught 4 of them.
So what I'm hearing then, the VC are still very active, but the NVA are increasingly there.
Yes, but I think the Kinwa province was unusual. It was as an outlier, if you will, because of its radical history, and had such a strong, favorable approach to the VC movement as opposed to the Northern movement. The only time the war actually intruded was when there were anti-war demonstrations over in Kansas. They actually had to activate the National Guard. Rioters burnt down the student union. There was one time one of the fellow people in my program was also a captain who had been an interrogation officer in a different infantry division. I think he was in the 1st Infantry Division. So he and I became dear friends. We still are to this day. And we got word that there was going to be a sit-in, light-in demonstration in all of the campus buildings. And so he and I both came to class that morning wearing our combat boots. And if there were going to be people lying on the ground with me trying to get to school, they were going to feel my combat boots. It didn't happen, unfortunately. He would have liked to. So the interesting that came out of that is one of the members of our program was a member of the Kansas National Guard, and he was nationalized for about a week. And he says, he actually began to sympathize with it. He was very definitely liberal, anti-war, but all of a sudden he's guarding, the city hall and the student union and things like that. And he said, "You guys are putting up with a lot." There was an anti-war movement at the university. I had no really nasty confrontations at all. A lot of the students in my program was very isolated. We all did the same courses together. We all did everything together. We didn't really fertilize the rest of the university, if that's the right word. But we had questions. We had serious questions from some of our professors, because they knew that at least Tom and I were veterans, and we had been in Vietnam, and they were sort of, what was it like, and all of that stuff. And we're trying to explain it to someone who has no personal experience with the military and combat. It was very hard to explain. But it didn't affect my schooling. It didn't affect it did sort of solidify the fact that I probably wanted to go back in the active duty and not be a city manager. But that's about all.
Was that partly, I'm interested in, why you made that decision. And I wonder if that was partly because, so here's just a theory I have, and I'm interested in whether there's anything to this theory at all. When you're in Vietnam, certainly there must be days where it's exhausting. But overall, it must be pretty interesting. I mean, especially compared to what these college kids are doing in Kansas. What I was doing in Vietnam was a heck of a lot more interesting than this. And also a heck of a lot more important. The questions I'm dealing with in Vietnam are life and death, serious questions that are of global consequence. I was doing something really important in Vietnam. And now I'm sitting in class with, these students, and this, relative to what I experienced in Vietnam, this feels a little Mickey Mouse. That's my theory. How much does that fit with your own experience?
It does. It fits very well, because again, I'm in a program with a set group of about 20 students. We took the same courses. Some of them were specializing, let's say, in state government, some were in city government, some were in my case, really the national issue of public administration. But we were together a lot. And everyone in that group knew what Tom and I had done. And we didn't get questioned a lot. I mean, what was it really like sort of question. It was, you know, to me, it was like you just said, I'd done something important and now I was just a student. no, no structure and no danger.